we wanted to bring people who have an interest in art and an experience. She's also a visual artist. And so that's why we wanted to have this discussion here, because we wanted to have a discussion from an artistic background, because we usually like to bring people from similar experiences so we can have a, richer conversation and discussion. And so I'll leave the floor to Ezra in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And the first time we are in this meeting with all of us based in Italy. And I hope you won't complain a lot about Milan. So actually, with the introduction, since like Dilan has specific questions about think tank, I don't need to explain everything from the beginning, but like basically as a think tank, we are tackling with the issues of architecture, art, urbanism, but all like in a superposed way, and I would say in the field of museology, how we can unfold all these layers. Of course, with the history and politics is like our main passion to explaining and looking at the things. So, and you both, I guess, have more or less some ideas about the manifest. If you want, like, we can start with discussions of think tank, then we can have some questions like to you and your experience as an expat, as an artist, as a young artist in Milan.
Yeah.
Yep. No, go ahead.
So
you can go ahead and start. I was just saying, that we could go ahead in that.
I mean, I actually like I don't want to ask something like I want to open a discussion about like presentational crisis. What do you mean by that? Let's open it up and discuss it a bit better. Like I was thinking, so.
The representational crisis, such a hype topics these days. Yeah, I think that we mentioned that because the things bothers us is like after certain awareness in this like last 5 years happening, the instead of solving in like as a proper museological and museographical perspective, the individual museums or like art institutions try to solve like in a sneaky and sly way to showing up some like literally symbolic representation, but that wasn't our demand or intention to bringing this topic. So it's one of the things like we would like to have a program in the future, like how should museums handle these issues, and we already have certain not very clear but certain vision about museums should be like this and that, and it can be more transparent in that way, and there are some democratizing tools they can manage better. So we want to open up this discussion with the other parties in this art and museum world, and because it's not very fair to discuss this topic in the like administrative level, but really starting from the otherness to pulling the how to say inclusive background into the museum.
And so like Ezra was mentioning, that it's very important that instead of it being something that is represented to tokenism and to be like, okay, you can see here we have this artist from this country or this one, we wanted it to be the conversation from the ground up, like she said, instead of it being from an authoritative or administrative level. And because we felt that these conversations weren't happening, that we wanted to try and open them a little bit from our perspective, is what are their experiences? How do they think their art should be represented in museums? How do they think the studies of the backgrounds, the way, you know, art or history or culture is represented, is it in the best way they think it should be represented? And to have these discussions, even though we don't want to reach a final goal of this is exactly how it needs to be, to have a conversation and then to have general guidelines about how these conversations should happen.
I think go ahead, sorry. Again, I keep interrupting you as soon as you start talking.
No. Like I would like to discuss about that issue because like I'm not sure that it's just about like problem of museum. Most probably you don't think as well, but the thing is like it's about root of contemporary art, mostly like how we consider one work as an artwork, what's the criteria about taking an artwork into museum, and there is proper, like, is any proper way to look at an artwork as a, like, it has value to get into museum? So I'm asking all these questions because I think, like, for me, sometimes these questions also about how you approach things, and it's sometimes very cultural, and that's why I'm asking these questions to you, that in order to understand better what you wanted to point it out or make it more specific to approach all these things, like not getting so much like stick on let's say just museum, but like I feel like it's a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, it definitely is, but also if we're talking about it specifically from the museum perspective, then it's kind of hard to try and imagine how that can be solved, the issue of representation and all of that, because that's just kind of the structure of museums. It's like people are put there as tokens, as look, we did this, look, we did this, look, we did this, and look how inclusive and amazing we are, because it's just that kind of institute. Like, it's kind of difficult to be able to see museums as an institution as being more inclusive in a way that's actually genuine and not just for the looks of it. But like when I try to think of a more inclusive way for the otherness in art to not be otherness and just be there, I can't really see it in a museum setting. I always see it in alternative settings. It's always like when there's an exhibition in the middle of the street, or there's some random party, and at the side of the party there's also a little live art show happening, and that's where I can see that happening. But it's really difficult to kind of imagine museums as being an inclusive space, because it's not something that gives you that feeling. Even like just walking into a museum doesn't feel comfortable. You feel restricted, and it's not a space that I can see inclusivity being done and like otherness being taken in more genuinely in a fluid way. It will always feel in one way or another somewhat forced and very structured, because again, it is coming from the top down, and it's like, okay, this group of people who have been working in this museum since forever, running things in this specific way since forever, but for some extra publicity, or to actually, even if they do actually genuinely want to be inclusive, there's still that gap in between who is providing the space and who's providing the opportunity and who is being exhibited. Then that relationship will still show up as this is tokenism, this is not genuine representation.
I mean, for me, this problem has like most of the art institution. For example, galleries are also not that welcoming. Like, people really hesitate to enter inside. Like, and it's, for me, like we can apply what you're saying to other institutions as well.
Yeah.
Galleries or
But since
even non-profit space, I think.
True. But museums claim themselves as public spaces. So, like from the beginning, we kind of differentiate galleries as more commercial side of the art world, but museums supposedly, like the way they define their mission is public, and they have to have like public programs, educational programs, and that's like symbolically museums means a lot in the capitalistic art production and the art world.
And then let's talk about Italian museums, because basically you can't enter in an Italian museum without paying. If it's not first of, you know, like first week of month on Sunday. So then, like, how it became, I think for me galleries are more public than museums in Italy, because you can freely enter. And I mean, in order to be accessible, you know, like, and for me, I mean, that's what I can like give good example about museum in terms that, like, I can give example of like Mambo, like they make really, like, I'm gonna talk about like otherness, not in a sense of like race and gender based, but like for me, if you don't get into systems, then you became other. So
in a sense that outsiderness.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and for me, otherness is really. I see my. I hear my voice.
There's like an.
Maybe you can try with the earphones, if possible.
It's impossible to find. Whatever. So, like, for me, otherness is a really, really important topic, but not in order to have just like gender based, but like being outsider, I can take. And in that sense, like, that's why, like, why I discuss about issue about being outsider in museum and in gallery, because then they how can I say that in Italy there is this thing I feel like we don't, you know, like produce art in a context that we feel inside of the thing, and which is like, it's not just for me what I see mostly. It's not just about like I'm coming from another country, or like I have like different race and things like that, but also it's more about I'm not into system, and it's not so inclusive, let's say. What do you think, Malab, about it? I don't hear.
Sorry, I muted it because of the echo, and then I forgot about it, as one does. So as I was saying, is I agree with what you said, because there is this kind of view of like, yeah, exclusivity in Milan in general, or in Italy in general, and that goes way beyond just art or museums. That like it goes to everything from like how people interact with each other. There's this kind of clique-based, group-based, like you are from this group of friends, you go to these places, you like. It goes way beyond just art or museums and how they operate, but it gets into how everybody individually operates. And so yeah, there's this, if you're not already if you don't already have a built-in system of people, you have connections of where to exhibit, you have connections of who you can work with, then it's really difficult to kind of get over that first step and trying to actually enter the art world, the art scene in general, like to find anything, any kind of resource, there's this kind of credibility given to the group you are from. That doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, it's not race, gender, it's not just race, it's not just gender, it's not just economic or like social status. It's all of these put together, and specifically who do you know, and based on that, it's how you get in. But obviously that applies everywhere, but I feel it's a little bit, it's kind of amplified here somehow, especially because you also see it in how people interact socially. So yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. There was something else that I wanted to add that had now completely escaped my mind. So I'll get back to it if it comes back.
So in that sense, for me, that's why I think it's important to talk about like wider like talking about otherness in a wider sense, because it's also like being, for me, it's like personally, when I do my artworks, I see things like this perspective and try to become more inclusive in that sense. So for me, it's important to talk about that sense. That's why I wanted to open up this topic, especially if we talk about Italian art scene, which is a bit like so much exclusive for me, at least. So
I think also generally, not just in Italy, but generally Western world, there's this idea here, specifically talking about otherness in terms of race and where you're from specifically. There's this kind of, let's say, this obsession with fitting into a specific stereotype, because there's this there is a demand for tragedy porn. It's for example, I'm from Sudan. I'm an expat. I'm not from here. At the same time, a lot of my work centers queer art and queer just discussions in general, and I try to put that in my art. And because I'm both from a majority Muslim country and my art is centering queer issues, people specifically just expect it to be sad and like very tragic. And no, I want to talk about random things, about just being gay and doing random stuff. But no, it's like, but you're from here and you're this, so your experience must be this, otherwise this is not exactly what we're looking for, which is a conversation that happens a lot. It's when there's, let's say, some kind of grant or something for queer artists in general, or for just immigrant artists from developing countries, quote unquote, then it's kind of balanced out by, it's kind of judged by how much are you suffering, like how commodifiable is your suffering and your tragic life. If it can't be turned into daytime drama, then is it really worth our investment in it? So there's also that problem of, you don't fit the specific stereotype. I want your life must be sad in order for me to enjoy this work. Otherwise, if you have a different kind of life than what I expect it to be, then how am I going to communicate with this art? How am I going to, it has nothing to do with me. And also I can't pity you using it. So is this really of any use to me? So yeah.
I
think that what you're saying is so true in a context that people are seen as a bunch of stereotypes and not seen as, you know, individual artists who have their own experiences and backgrounds and interests and personality. And so they want you most of the time, if a person does come from these other contexts, like you say, they expect you to represent your art other than and yourself in a very limited context without you know, having any in-depth interest in that person as an artist or as a person. So you need to, you know, fill in a checklist of what they expect from you from these specific stereotypes, like you were saying.
Yeah.
I think it's motivated by what Malab said. Actually, it's motivated by academy, because then, like, in academy, there are no so much people who are coming from other contexts. So they are really like, as I can say in Italy, they are really Italian, and they come from a specific class and specific, let's say, environment. And then, like, because of that, even though like they are really really nice people, they have really good intention, because of there is no like proper discussion environment that they can fit them, they can fit their self. So it's became really like poor in order to have like this kind of discussion, in order to not have this kind of discussion environment. And that's why it come exotism, then it come like I don't know, many interpretation like exotism, Eurocentrism. It's the source of the thing is like that. But yes, like for me, that's why, because also system doesn't fit that coming from other contexts is not very welcoming in Italian art scene. If you doesn't, if you are not, let's say, get proper points. Like if you are an emerging artist, if you are trying to discover yourself, it's not good to environment to grow up, let's say.
I actually think the good thing about Milan is that it does have, like when I was saying earlier that I feel there's more inclusivity in art when it's in different spaces, like not the traditional, more constructed kind of spaces. And I think this is what Milan does well, is you still have to find it. It's not so, it's still a niche group, but you can still find these alternative exhibiting spaces and little tiny pockets of people where, and those are the places where you can really create a network and actually present your art to people that will not have specific expectations for it, because it's not a context that comes with expectations. Because again, when we're talking about museums, it's already the place where you're exhibiting comes with expectations of what you're going to exhibit. But if it's an exhibition space, a temporary exhibition space, let's say in the middle of the street, or like I said, in a random party or something, then that expectation is gone, and you get more freedom to exhibit whatever it is you make, whatever it is you want to make, exhibit whatever it is you want to exhibit. And I think that's what Milan does well, is once it is difficult to find these pockets, but once you do find these pockets of people and these little pockets, these little communities where art is more fluid, where there's no specific structures for what you're supposed to do, then you kind of start to like be able to actually enter the art scene. But then again, the art scenes in Milan are very what's the word, segregated. There is the art of the fancy people, quote unquote, in museums, in the proper where you have to, like in the spaces where, like I said, there's specific expectations for what you're exhibiting, and therefore there's specific expectations for how people are going to react to what you're exhibiting. And then there's the completely different other art world of people just doing whatever they want, and other people coming and enjoying it, and that's it. And that's the art scene that I try to get into and get more and be able to create a network in, because the other art world is not, they're not completely segregated. They still interact in more than one way, because whoever is in one can possibly be in the other. But it's just the environments that one seems to me as a place that I feel comfortable having my art in, and one is a place that I will feel out of place, I will feel tokenized, and I would feel like I'm being used as a puppet, because it doesn't feel like a space that was created for me, essentially. And now it's just a space where they're trying to add me to the equation in order for whatever motive, whatever reason behind it. But it's regardless of how that's executed, it doesn't feel genuine. So yeah, there's also this issue of completely different scenes. Like when you're talking about the art world in Milan or in Italy, but in Milan specifically, because that's what I know, they are two completely different environments.
It's like there are so many cores. But like what I will say, like non-profit organizations are like really, there are some non-profit organizations which I really like, such as Spazione, Metodo, and like also it was like Centro Sociale Macao, and there was many exhibition before pandemic, but I don't know after that much. But like I think that's the thing. Yes, there is like the problem coming from that thing. Like there are so many good non-profit organizations, but also it's not enough for like being non-profit organization is not enough for like let's say making art, because then like artists also should pay their rent, and in that case that's the thing for emerging artists as and also art workers, like and people who works in art industry, that they don't have much opportunity to have literally like gain money and also like enter the system without any sacrification. And for that thing, that's why the system eliminates proper people coming from proper class in that sense, because they can't survive basically in that art system.
Sum up a little, I think both Dilan and Malab gave incredible insights, and Dilan was more highlighting the class struggle and how art world structures itself in the economic power dynamics. And Bibi was saying very interesting that different identities is consumable only if they represent some stereotypes. And maybe I wanna ask some question to Bibi. Something seemed a bit contradictory to me about, like, she was complaining about so many social clusters exist in the art world, and it's very hard to penetrate them. But is it also an advantage in the alternative art scene? And I have another question for both of you guys, that one of the main idea of the think tank is to question the valorization of the museum or the power of the museum. If they will become less powerful in the future, we wouldn't be that concerned about how they dominate the system or how they represent their collections. So, like, as I understand, you are both giving examples, as a good examples, that alternative spaces, which is great. But shouldn't we also demand the real museum power to change themselves and somehow, I know it's hard to believe, but somehow become really inclusive in terms of class and identity politics?
Okay, well, to start with your first question, it is very contradicting, but in a general sense, it's not a good thing in either way to have this kind of closed off environment. But when you look at it in terms of one is a closed group, but in somewhat of a higher, like in a step up that you're unable to reach. But the other one, when we're talking about alternative spaces and like the alternative art scene in Milan, those are groups that are kind of self-created because it's a group of people that all of them are having a hard time getting into that top quote unquote group that is just unpenetratable, and then they all get together and create their own thing. But the thing about the alternative spaces in Milan, it also differs space to space, but they are more generally, obviously, more inclusive than a museum would be. But both of them are a group. Both of them are a specific collection of people. It's just that one was created out of exclusion, and one was created out of being excluded and having to find a space for yourself. Not find, actually, but create a space for yourself that wasn't there before. So yeah, it is contradicting, but then when you look at it in terms of a group that's not allowing people in and a group of people who are not allowed in trying to find another space, then you can see that, okay, there's a reason, there's a good view of why these alternative spaces kind of function in the way that they do. I'm gonna need you to remind me about the second question.
How museums like valorize themselves?
This is generally, I'm really a person that believes in reform. When a space is created in such a structured, like museums are a space that have a very heavy ambience of colonization in it. Like you enter them and you feel like you're being robbed, regardless of what that museum is for. It doesn't need to have anything to do with culture, or it could just be an art museum, specifically a contemporary art museum. But still, something about it, because it came from that and it has that legacy of not exactly being inclusive and not exactly being correct, let's say, then it's just not a thing that I see. I don't see museums evolving in a way that can genuinely be inclusive. I think different spaces just need to be created, and different spaces need to be given more power and more recognition. Because if a space was created for a certain intention and it still functions in the way of that intention, then that, regardless of who you put as artist of the month or look at this pretty new person, it doesn't matter, because it's still, the basis of it is still the same. It still feels excluding. It still feels very cold. Not it's not a thing that I see happening. It might be, but I just personally, I don't see museums as evolving into places that are genuinely inclusive and genuinely more open for different types of art, different types of artists, different everything. I just think that different spaces need to be given more recognition, and alternative spaces need to be given more opportunities and more backing, because they're just not. Even if museums evolve in a way that includes more people, it's still not going to include everybody. So just different things just need to be out there for people to take part in.
Then, what do you think about the activism towards disregarding the museums? Because I completely get what you are saying, but I'm trying to pushing the boundaries of like reverse thinking. Like, instead, if we can take back the recognition and power from the museums, so even like include stealing back as an act of like not a passive demanding them being inclusive by themselves. Of course, it's not the case. But what kind of activism? Like, I want to understand. You are trying to say we should just give up on museums and create the new space for the future, because even like today, for example, in the architectural symbolism, they correspond. For example, 17th century's cathedral. Like, building a museum is such a big thing, and I get that giant recognition and institutionalized power and information they're holding is very hard to change by reforms. But I am seeing incredible art activists. They are doing like very brave performances, and I think that's, even if there will be some changes in the popular culture, like if they push people to think in that way, so taking back this recognition can be an alternative way.
No, I definitely don't think museums are just don't have a future or completely just obsolete. I think there is a way for them to continue to have a space, but the problem currently, what I see, is that they have too much space. They have most of the space. It's not that they shouldn't be there, it's just that other things should be there as well. So museums have they have a long way to go, and like to create an actual like a welcoming space, but they still can't be taking all the space. They can create a welcoming space, but give also more what is the word? I'm losing my words, but yeah, just as in give more space to more alternative forms of exhibiting, and more alternative forms of
yeah, I mean, I really agree with Malab, because I think museum became a touristic attraction and like a consuming art or something like that mostly, and yeah, artists care that because it brings prestige, it brings recognition, many let's say title issue. But like I really agree with Malab, because also I think that's why I give like Mambo as an example, because also we need space to create. We need motivation to create art in a sense of like with a freedom that we don't need to fit in something which we have to fit in order to survive, or like get more recognition, or that, because of museums are really powerful and they have like really structural way which you can get in. So then like this like I think the power can, as Malab said, like shared with other non-profit organization which run by artists and people who is more into the kitchen, let's say, without PRs, without people who, let's say, take advantage of art. Because what we see actually in pandemic, that when all institution was like kind of like closed. Actually, there is art because there are artists. So like for me, that's essential to motivate this thing and create a kind of like incubator for artists. And in this system, who is like really suffering? Mostly like art workers, people who really care about art and doing something for art, and artists. And if we look at the other the people, I would not say like curators, but like more like museum managers or like PRs. And for these people, like for example, let's take Tate. Like Tate workers like couldn't have their money, like their salary for a long time. And what happened, you know, like, and these people actually make it real. The shows, the arts, like the real thing they are making. But what's happening? So I think because of that, like the structure itself, it happened like that. If there was another structure, which, because generally non-profit organization, we do everything by ourselves, and there is another structure of, you know, like not hierarchical, but like co-worker structure. So that's why I agree with Malab.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask a question in regards to that to both of you. Is that as Ezra mentioned earlier, like museums are seen as, you know, the public institutions. It's where people have access to these kind of to art, to these things that are related to culture and history, and you know what museums represent. And so through creating these different structures, and you know, you were saying that at the point there were niches, and so not everyone has access to them in a certain way, not because it's intentional, just because it's a niche and not people know about them. And so how can these structures be more accessible to, you know, the general public, people who are interested in, you know, art and what museums provide today, in a way that that can be provided other than the museums? Because for example, with schools or with the general public, their first view of art or of otherness is through museums, and so they shape these ideas. And so how do we move it into, if that's the solution to these alternative structures, how do we make sure that more people have access to these spaces so that they do create a genuine alternative to museums?
I think for me, I would say, I think there is this problem that's like, who becomes artists? Like, which kind of people become artists? And then like, why I'm asking this thing, and I'm getting in a point that like, being an artist is no, like for a long time, and also nowadays is becoming more and more class issue. So if this thing change, then people gonna see more familiar things. Public see more familiar things that they can interact. Then it's not became just like a elite, let's say elite thing to interact with art, because then people gonna have like representation, familiar aesthetic, and things like that. Then it became rich and rich. I feel like that's, then like we have no way, like we don't need to, like what museums did, for example, Tate for a long time did, like became a tourist attraction, and like became museums became like influencer, YouTuber attraction or something. It's really, I don't know. is it that thing is like being public is that one? I mean, I'm questioning this thing because for me, I mean, I personally doesn't feel like art should be, let's say, like more close to public or not. I mean, artists shouldn't concern about that thing. Artists should just make art. But like what I'm telling, that there is no variety in the field, that there is no so much different people in the area that public can interact. I think that's, I mean, in my view, it's if we support artists, or like if there are foundations or not just foundation, also like mentorship, because most of artists doesn't have like mentor, I think, because like maybe they are so intelligent, maybe they have things, but they don't have like any mentor and or like people who support them in their journey, that how they like interact with things. So I think it's about mostly that, for me at least.
I think the question of making alternative art spaces more accessible is the same as making just art in general more accessible, which I mean, it, like I said before, it that could really be helped by backing of these spaces, like the support, financial support specifically, of these alternative spaces by cities, by other organizations, or whatever other kind of institute is involved in. So let me rephrase for a second. But yeah, anyways, so like I was saying, it's the question of making these art spaces more accessible. It's the same as making art itself more accessible, and it's all about things like, one, like I said, funding, and just backing in other ways that are not necessarily monetary, but monetary is the biggest issue, obviously, and that's partially why most of these alternative spaces don't really have much reach, because they don't have the finances to be able to advertise everywhere around the city, let's say, so it has to go by word of mouth. But another thing that, because this is an issue that can be, like, different sides can pitch in to kind of minimize that gap in between general public and art spaces. So from, let's say, institutions, from cities, from all of that, it can be, that gap can be minimized by backing, by funding, by et cetera, and then from the spaces themselves, that gap can be filled by just interaction, making these spaces more visible, not necessarily by advertisements, because that's not, like I said, not something very accessible. But to take an example, there's an alternative space, an exhibiting space called Spazio Serra, that's in Lancetti train station. It's just outside in the train station, so the people that see it are not people who are necessarily interested in art per se, or not necessarily artists, but they're just people passing by the station, and then that space is there. And I think more spaces like that is needed, because it's just about exposure. So more exposure to the fact that art can be exhibited anywhere, and art can look and be anything, then that kind of makes that gap of like just general public and art much smaller, because you see it on a daily basis, you interact with it, you understand that it's not just this specific type of painting that is in this specific type of big building with white walls and really bright lights. Like, it can also be outside in a train station, and it being a projection of some sort, or it's whatever shape it may be. But yeah, so it is like it's an issue that needs a lot of collaboration from a lot of sides to actually be able to bridge that gap. But I think most of the responsibility falls onto bigger institutions and like cities themselves to back these spaces in order to fill that gap, because these spaces again are self generated, self organized. It's not, there's so much you can do when you're a group of all artists who are living on bare minimum salaries and things like that. It's like, how many advertisements can you buy per month to show people that this thing is happening here? But yeah.
I think it's also a proof of how media control is in the advantage of the big corporations. But I think there's we need to differentiate that scale between paid to, let's say, a small city museum in Italy.
Yeah.
So like still that clusters in Milan, it's very niche, and you are both in the art world and quite insider point of view. But when you think of a working class family looking for a weekend activity, I am not sure if it's like very accessible, very inclusive too. So I think there must be like certain policies should develop between municipal level support and funding, and that self-initiated, self-generated entities in the city, that alternative space. Because it's an alternative from what? Independent from what? We always, as a think tank, tend to ask that kind of question. Alternative from academy, alternative from like most of that alternative space is even driven by a group of students, probably classmates, or they come through with certain similar identity issues. That's great. They need more support, but still, then we need to demand that support publicly from the government, because technically, actually, we all pay taxes for the museums. So, and we cannot access that space. And they have the collection, they have the power of narrative of the collection, which is even more problematic. And then we have to create the alternative space. We need to advertise, we need to pull the people. Like, that's so unfair, right? Amal?
No, I totally agree with what you're saying, because it becomes important to define these different views on if we create different spaces, who funds them, where do they come from, who has accessibility to them. But for me, it was very interesting, the idea of including these spaces in the urban fabric, where it becomes very accessible to people and they can all have access to it. But like she was saying, for example, if you have a family that goes to, they want to have a space where they visit all these things, it's not always as accessible. So it becomes very important to define these, not like structurally define, because this is an issue, like this is what we're talking about. We don't need to define and have an authority about it, but to really question how do we create and view these spaces and how they can develop. And so I think these are very interesting points to look at, but I still think that it's something that requires a lot of discussions and work. And like she said, it's also important to push and not just discuss, but also to push these spaces to give access to, you know, alternative options and not just discuss it.
I would like to also add a small point regarding basically what we're saying in terms of how art can be, or like art spaces can be more inclusive. It kind of ties into how art needs to be, or how art is viewed to need to be consumed. Because like you said, like as a family, a low-income family going for some kind of weekend activity, but then you can also, it doesn't need to be structured in that way. And that's what I like about spaces that kind of fit into daily activities. So it's not, art does not necessarily, there does need to be art spaces that allow that kind of consumption and that is more accessible. But at the same time, there needs to be more spaces that don't necessarily ask you to be there for an extended amount of time looking at this one piece and really, you know, suck all of it in and understand it and discuss about it. It could just be something that you walk past in the street, take a second to look at it because you like it, maybe take the leaflet to read what it's about. So when we're talking about how art can be inclusive, we also really need to talk about how art needs to be consumed, which is, there is no specific way. It just, you consume it however you consume it, which then later on translates to there needs to be several different spaces that allow you to consume art in all of these several different ways.
Yeah, but like also that's the thing about like public art in Italy, because of there are so many, let's say, paperwork. If you wanted to do something in public, maybe that's an issue, because like I remember I wanted to do one project inside this part of like yard, which was like inside of 4 apartment or something, and they told me that like they explained me the process how I can get permission, was like really intimidating. And that's why also art is not so, like, especially in Italy, it's not so welcomed by municipality, let's say, and like Comune doesn't support that much, like not doesn't support, but because of bureaucratic process is so long, then you can't, like, you just, especially if you're an emerging artist and you have many problems before that, and it's not so possible to make it in public. So I think even though you're right, there is really a big problem about that bureaucratic issue in if we talk about it in Italy.
So it's also an issue
also something that, sorry.
No, I was just gonna iterate that it's not something that needs to be questioned only from the point of view of spaces, but something that needs to be questioned from the perspective of policies and how they exclude or include certain, you know, artists or certain backgrounds, because from an elitist or as an institution, if they wanted to do something in a space, it might be even easier than for example, an emerging artist. So just to...
I just wanted to add that it's, again, a very intersectional issue of not just art, but also the idea of public spaces not really being accessible for the public. And that's an issue that goes beyond art, as like, it's just a general issue. Like, as a person who is in public, I should have access to this space. So that is also something that needs to change fundamentally, the whole thing, the whole process of trying to get permission to exhibit in a public space, which the sentence itself makes no sense. But yeah, so yeah, that's it. I just wanted to add that last point.
That's bureaucratic challenges in Italy. It's not an art-specific problem, so I don't know how to approach.
No, I mean that's the thing. Like, if we discuss about these issues, then it can be discussed in some places which they can represent us, like inside of commune, or like they can kind of like let's say stretch the.
But do you think that how to say, officialism and all that paperwork challenges push back all the emerging artists even trying to do something publicly or applying fundings, and in the mood of, okay, fuck it, we can do by our own, and to take more initiative and to go that more niche and alternative spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because that's the thing. And like, for doing something in public, like we were actually right now, like we were talking, like thinking about doing something public because there is pandemia, we can't exhibit, and like we don't know which color gonna became Milan, blah blah. And we were like thinking about doing something in public, but mostly that's the thing. In I mean, I don't know, there is this culture in Italy that's like studio, like it's, how can I say that, like public art and studio based or gallery based, white cube based art is really, I don't know, like massive. Like, how can I explain?
Dominating the
Yeah, exactly. So, and there is no, like, sometimes it's also about like the energy itself in the city, because then like it motivates one, maybe if someone do and then someone else do, and it's gonna create that energy. Like before in Milan, like before pandemia, there were so many exhibitions, which, like, I don't know, suddenly Milan became really like heart of the hard world. Like before, like there was a period, like many like famous artists exhibits in Milan, but I think it's also about, it sounds silly, but it's also about the energy of the city, that what's going on, like what people motivate what.
Mhm.
I think I have a, sorry, Amal.
Yeah.
I have the final question, like final new topic about online presence.
I was just I was just gonna ask if the
That's the
pandemic.
theme.
No, continue.
So because we tend to perceive like online presence can be more democratic in a sense that everybody has access internet today, but still we see like very strong domination through that big art institutions and museums, also in online. On the other hand, like I was listening a conversation in ICOM. The participants were one from, I guess, the Davis Museum and the museum manager of Nigerian National Museum. And you could just easily recognize what kind of problems they are tackling with, like in Nigeria, there are like so many electric cuts and all that problems. Of course, within the pandemic, they couldn't work on their online presence as quick as Holland. And the Stedelijk Museum start receiving 2 million clicks per week. Like, it's insane. Like, it's because we don't perceive internet space as a physical space, but actually in terms of like timeline, it's more or less the same. And if a museum attracts that much of online viewers in their exhibition rooms, of course there's not enough room for the others. So how you can evaluate these issues, and also what do you think about that alternative space has more or less chance in the online world?
Just before you start answering, just because so we don't have to ask the question again, and I was just going to continue with that point of you know, having a certain brand name, even though we need, like she said, we like to imagine that with internet things are more democratic. But for example, if you have the British Museum name, it's easier, for example, for media outlets to give you, for example, advertisement, and it's just more easier, for example, if you're looking for an online exhibition, for if you open it in Google, for it to go up. And so even in that context, do you think that the internet, even though is considered more democratic, does give an opportunity for these alternative spaces, as Ezra was asking?
I think I would like to touch that topic because I, in your also like manifesto, you write it down these things, but I don't think that like it's the things are more accessible like before than before, because also like especially if you consider about like I mean right now with when the pandemic first started, everything was like so accessible because it was like first time that we all experienced that thing, and everybody like opened their source. Every institution opened their source. But right now, this online culture also creates some kind of like boundaries which you can't access, or like, and I think it's make it more like I don't know, I don't personally I'm not supporting so much that online experience, because I think it's this online experience has like it's not like the same experience which we had before, and it's completely another experience which you need to create art according to that experience specifically. And it's a crisis of representation, because it became not art but representation of art for me. But like for me that's the thing. I really think like if you can create like internet has that illusion that it looks like you have like accessibility, and you can create your own page and you can show your own work, but it's not different than like non-profit space which they show their friends, because basically you have no access, like you have no proper network that you can share. You can really be visible. You need to have some like you need to have some media behind, not media, but like people surrounding which they can support you. Like it's like NFT, you know, like NFT also for me like that. Like people, I mean, I'm not so. Maybe it's good for like institution, like I don't know, for some institution, but also it's about referencing. So I'm not so sure about that online stuff create democratic, let's say, environment. It's just give that illusion of democracy for me.
Yeah, I think what I have to say is kind of just emphasizing what Dilan just said. There's it's not any new points, but yeah, it's basically, if we're talking about the current context, there is people are just overwhelmed with screen content. So there's that issue currently. But overall, the internet, using it as it's not exactly a leveled playing field. Oh, is it disappear? Or is she? Okay. Aman, you're also muted.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. She had to come back. I was just gonna say continue while she gets back, but she's back.
No worries. Okay. So as I was saying, the internet isn't exactly like a leveled playing field, because whatever audience you have online is kind of a build-up from whatever audience you have physically. You have in a physical space. So if you're a well-established, well-known institute, then obviously you'll very easily create an audience online. But if that's not the case, then again, you'll have to go, it's the same issues, just in a different way. So you'll have to go through word of mouth. You tell your friends about the space, they tell their friends, but not really, and then the word doesn't really get around, and it's just the same issue again in a different form. But also it has other ways that it can be useful. Like for me, most of my stuff is published online because, and this again ties in with what I said earlier about how you kind of need to fit into a specific stereotype in order to be accepted, is that I would use the internet to target a specific audience. So my art is made not for the consumption of white people. It's not made for the consumption of straight people. So I specifically target queer people of color. For example, for this specific artwork, this is the kind of people that I want to consume it. It's not art to be consumed here. So it has that advantage, but still, again, it's a very limited advantage because, again, it depends on the actual audience that you have, how you build your audience, how well networked are you virtually as well, because there's only so many hashtags you can put in order to get to so many people. Whatever you have to say is not going to get all around unless you already have a built-in audience from before. Otherwise, it's just, like I said, the same problem created again virtually, but it does have that tiny little pocket of being able to choose who you want to see your work. Like, this is specifically made for this person. I want this type of person to see this work because this is who it's made for. And I'm currently not in that context. Therefore, this is the only way I can get there. So it's not, I would say it's definitely not a level ground. It's not like a democratic space. It's not a space where, you know, everybody can come in and has the same base level opportunity and you do. It is not like that at all, because it has to be referenced onto what is happening in real life outside of that virtual context, let's say.
But also, on another context, from the point of view of, for example, viewers or audiences, specifically for people coming from a certain socioeconomic background, don't you guys think that it still gives a certain level of accessibility that wouldn't have been found before? Because if we look at these museums and these places for artwork, it's usually found in European institutions, in the Western world, in specific places. For example, for a young person coming from, for example, my background from Sudan, who wants to view specific pieces of art or wants to connect to people from different parts of the world, doesn't the internet, even though I agree totally with it not being able to democratize, not have advantages to kind of connect these people and give them accessibility that they did not have before?
No, I definitely agree with that, but I feel like that is a point that is stated over and over again, and it's very clear that the internet has these advantages, but at the same time, you can't dismiss the fact that it is not a space that exists in a vacuum separate of all other things. It is still influenced by how real life structures are and how society works in general. So yes, it definitely has its advantages of it definitely increases accessibility, but still to so much.
Yeah.
It doesn't go so far as this magical, wonderful, leveled, all balanced land that it kind of seems to be, which it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
I think even though it creates accessibility, it kind of not I can't say degrade, but it create another experience which we actually like. That actually I'm not sure specifically about like works based on like specific like site specific works, and I don't know. For me, it's also somehow maybe I'm a bit romantic in that sense, but like it's somehow like kill the curiosity in that sense, because then like when I see an artwork, like when I see on internet, it's something, but when I experience it, it's something else, because it's basically, I'm gonna say again, that it's not the art itself, like it's the representation of the art. So it's like seeing something in book, like which most of the work which I've seen in the book, when I experienced them, it was totally something else for me. And even though, yes, it has accessibility, but before it was accessible as well, like before like making online exhibition, they had like images. Right now they put in really 3D rendering, and they make a scene for me. And before they were also like before there was no so much online exhibition around, you could access many of work, not in like right now, but like, I mean, I don't know, for me it's degrades the experience. So I'm not sure it's good or not, but definitely yes, it's good in terms of like having information about what's going on. But